Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jen Bankard. I'm the Director of Content Solutions and Conferences for the BTN Group, and I'd like to welcome you to our Decoding Managed Travel session. Just a few really quick notes before I introduce our fantastic speaker. So this session is only open to our travel buyer attendees, so I want you to know that this is a safe space. And that's really important because this session is really going to be driven by you. Joe and I have a bit of a plan, but we really want to make sure that the content of the session is what you want to discuss. So think of it as an Ask Me Anything type session. And so to answer all your questions, I want to introduce the amazing Joe Lloyd, who is a partner with Nina and Pinta. So welcome, Joe.
Hey,
so we've
Jen,
only got
thanks.
45 minutes and we want to answer as many questions as possible. So we're going to divide the session into 3 parts. So right now, if you go into hopefully this is working, on SwapCard right now. If you go into SwapCard, I'm hoping there are 3 poll questions that you can answer. And I'm not seeing them, so we might be at our first point where we need to sort of make a little bit of a pivot. Just excuse me here while I take a look at, nope, I apologize. I'm not seeing the poll questions. All right, so Joe, this is our first time. We're gonna kind of go with the flow.
No worries.
So using the chat feature in SwapCard, we're gonna do this. Tell us just in sort of one word, what would be sort of the most useful for us to discuss? Would it be helpful to talk about just some of those common industry terms that sometimes you're like, I think I know what that is, but I actually really don't, and I'm afraid to ask. So do you want to talk about some of those common industry terms? Do you want to review some of the acronyms that are out there? Which can also be a little confusing, or do you want to really kind of just focus on hot topics in the industry? So if you want to kind of just send some of those in by chat. Joe, I know that you've been talking to lots of buyers lately. And I think one of the things that is most top of mind right now, which is kind of interesting and exciting and also a little confusing, is the topic of digital health passports. Would you mind maybe just touching on that a little bit while we wait for some of those chat responses that are coming in? Oh, and I see that the poll is working now. So if folks can go ahead and answer, there should be 3 poll questions. Go ahead and just answer all the polls. But Joe, give us a minute or 2 on digital health passports while we're waiting for those responses to come in.
Sure, no problem. Jake, if we could pull up slide 5, that would be great. It was quite interesting as I was getting ready this morning. This was a topic that was discussed on the news. I know in the UK yesterday there was a big interview with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. So all of the discussion right now seems to be around digital health passports. And I think there's a couple of things to acknowledge. So there's a digital health passport and then there's a vaccine passport. So the 2 of them are different. So at the moment, what we're seeing with digital health in our space, in the managed travel industry, is really about making sure that you can get your negative COVID tests, your PCR tests, all of that stuff onto a single app. So you'll have seen that British Airways are trialing an app with this. They're using the Verify app, but there's a lot of other organizations that are doing the same thing. So the challenge really comes in that there are a number of these different products. And so I think that the difficulty is going to be around consistency. So it's really when people get a PCR test and they're using it to travel or to fly, a lot of countries are now requiring a negative PCR test. So, that does come through to you electronically on your phone, but this is a device where you can store everything together. So, it just means that you can do it on a hands-free as you go through the airports, etc. IATA is actually developing its own travel pass as well. American Airlines is working with, I want to say that they're working with Common Pass, but I might be lying. So anyway, the point
American is
that
working with Verifly.
Verifly,
I do know that.
American and British Airways, of course, they're using the same product. So then it must be United that's on Common Pass. Anyway, so the point being, it can get a bit confusing, as I've just beautifully demonstrated. There are airline trials going ahead with this, so we may find ourselves where we come to the point where an airline will dictate that you need to use one of these devices in order to travel. And this is really just about the tests. It's not necessarily about the vaccine. A vaccine passport brings up a different issue altogether. So, really, when you're talking about your travelers and organizations and governments are requiring you to have a vaccine to enter, it's worth saying that nobody has done this yet, but there's much discussion about it. So is it legal? Is it fair? When will these passports be used? There's been discussion about if you're going to a group event like a concert, or in our world, a conference, will you be required to have a vaccine passport in order to be allowed in? The question really comes, can an organization force an employee to have a medical intervention? So if you have somebody that works for your organization where previously 60% of their role might have been on the road, and now in order to go on the road, you're going to require them to have a vaccine and they're not up for it for whatever reason, what's the position of the organization then? Are they able to force somebody to do that? I think the answer to that question is going to be different depending on where in the world that you live and what's accepted as normal, because the other thing that really is going to become more and more relevant with these health passports, whether they're digital health or vaccine, is that there needs to be some uniformity between the different organizations and different governments of the world in order for them to be truly effective.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Joe. And obviously this is a complex topic, and so yes. It actually just happens that next week the BTN group is hosting a symposium, sort of a webinar plus. It's about a 2-hour event on digital health passports, and we've actually got 4 of the different sort of providers presenting. So we'll have a representative from AOK Pass, from Common Pass, from Travel Pass, and Verifly. So you can check that out on the Business Travel News website. Obviously, it'll be a little late in the day for those of you who are based in the UK and in Europe, but we will be recording the event. So if you want to register, we'll send you the recording on demand. All right. So, Joe, I think we're kind of in a little bit better spot with our polls and our chat. So definitely looks like people have lots of they want to talk about hot topics. So what I'm going to ask the audience is, in terms of hot topics, now go ahead and use sort of the Q&A feature in SwapCard and send us your questions about the topics that are most top of mind for you. I'll give a minute or two for some of those questions to come in. I can tell you that a couple things that, one of the things that has come in, Joe, in terms of a hot topic is wellness. So Simon sent that topic in. So Simon, if there's any specific questions around wellness, if you want to add that into the chat, we can make sure we sort of direct that a little more specifically. But in terms of the poll results, and this is where we can go to while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in. We did ask you which industry suppliers you have lots of questions about, and I had predicted this. TMC came in first, so over half of you have TMC related questions. So in addition to your hot topics questions, send in your questions that you have about sort of the landscape of the TMCs right now. But Joe, I think you do have a slide that you can share in the meantime to sort of talk about the current landscape of TMCs while we're waiting for those questions, if that's okay.
I do. So, Jake, if we could put up slide 4, that would be great. And then we can have a chat about TMCs. Just a thought on the wellness question as well. I was talking to my business partner just a couple of days ago, and he'd been involved in a survey, and I actually can't remember where that survey came from, but they had surveyed road warriors pre-COVID and asked what their position was now in terms of how they felt about going back to that in a post-COVID environment. And there was a small percentage, and it was interesting that it was a small percentage that couldn't wait to get back on the road, but a much larger percentage that didn't want to go back to the way things were pre-COVID, just in terms of life balance, wellness, that kind of thing. It was quite telling. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of discussion and quite a lot of work around trying to retain and regain that balance that people have enjoyed over the last 12 months, whereas normally, if they're on the road every week, to not be on the road every week, then the thought of going back to it does seem to be a little challenging for a lot of employees. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that's great, Joe. And actually, if you don't mind, because we've gotten a little bit more detail come in with some of the questions, and some of the people have been voting on the questions. So maybe we'll hold off on the TMCs just for a second. So the one question that came in that's gotten a lot of votes, it says that, the coronavirus has significantly reduced travel expenses. So how can we sort of sustain less travel sort of compared to the before times, after Corona? So I guess, how do we sort of continue to save money even once travel starts to resume a little bit? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting one, this one. I heard Paula Abbott talking about this very thing the other day, and I also have seen with some of our customers where they've not been on the road for the entire time of the pandemic, and yet their businesses have continued to function. And it's fair to say that there are people that sit within their procurement or in their finance departments that go, this works. Why do we need to go back to that much travel? But the reality of that is that only works when you have a level playing field. So when nobody's traveling, it can work. But as soon as the competition start traveling again, the pressure is going to be on businesses to get back on the road. I think the key thing is to really honestly look at the travel that has happened prior to COVID and try and ascertain how much of it was really necessary and how much of it could have been done by technology. One of the benefits of the last 12 months has been that this type of communication is now, very widely accepted. People engage with it a lot more than they did prior to COVID. So ask yourselves the type of meetings that would require somebody to travel. An obvious place to start is internal meetings. So, that's where a lot of organizations are focusing their attention to say, actually, for all of our internal meetings for the foreseeable future, these will be done in a virtual environment. But again, you need to be sensitive to that kind of stuff. So, if you're going to be meeting with somebody over a particularly sensitive topic, maybe it's a disciplinary action, something like that. You don't really want to do that in a virtual environment if you don't have to, right? So I think it's just applying scenarios and logic. What I would suggest to any travel manager that has the responsibility of this moving forward is to engage with some of those key stakeholders. HR would be a key stakeholder to have conversations with in this, as would anyone that sits in sales and marketing, or any department where they have a high proportion of travel in that particular department. So I would suggest that those are the people that you would engage with, and really just try and understand from them as to what they think is critical and essential travel versus what travel you think you can continue to do in this type of format.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. So now the questions are coming in fast and furious. I know this one is a particular topic of interest for you. We've talked about it before. So Nikki is asking, in the current environment, what is the best practice for renegotiating airline contracts at the current time? Is it just looking at extensions, or are there some other options?
Yeah, I have to say, this is such an interesting experience. I've never done an event like this before. I have no idea what I have to talk about. It's quite fun. So yeah, airline contracts. Well, the big challenge with the airlines at the moment is around capacity, around resource, and it's really about how quickly that's going to come back. I think to engage in a full airline RFP at this stage would be a little pointless, really, because, there's a lot of routes. I haven't got the latest figures from IATA, but the last time I looked, I think they're operating at something like a 48% capacity of usual. And I doubt very much it's changed much since then. So, you don't even know what routes are likely to be coming back if they're not currently being served at the moment. So, for me, I would put it in something of a holding pattern. If you have contracts that are expiring, try and extend them as much as you can, which actually will be the preferred option of the airlines anyway. Because they also are not in a position where they want to start playing hardball or looking at targets, etc. So try and extend them as much as you can, unless there's a particular reason why you would want to negotiate. And that can happen, right? Where there are particular reasons why you would want to negotiate. We've done it. I've negotiated with airlines during the pandemic and put contracts in place. It is possible. It takes longer, but there needs to be some well thought through logic as to why you need to be changing the landscape right now. Does that make sense?
Sure. And certainly if, we need any follow up, Nikki, just let us know in the chat. But sort of another airline related question from Alexander. He's asked. They're asking. We expect that airline ticket prices will increase a lot in the future. Are we alone in thinking so? And if not, how much of a percentage might we be expecting?
Okay, well, the latter part of that question, I do not know.
You don't have a crystal ball?
Well, I do, but I'm not sure it works.
Okay.
So I think you're not alone. Those prices are going to increase, and that's going to be for a couple of reasons. The major one being capacity, right? So, and there are indications that show that once people are able to travel again, there is an appetite to travel again. So once we're kind of let out of the gates, as it were, there is going to be an appetite, and then we are going to have a capacity issue, and that will drive the costs up. So I think how much will depend on cabin, it will depend on route, it will depend on competition. That's going to be another key thing. So whereas previously, pre-COVID, in a competitive route, you can get much stronger in terms of how you negotiate and what you can do. It's much more of a buyer's market. But remember, this is all about supply and demand. That's what the travel industry is. And when we come back, at least initially, before we see the increase in capacity, if we see an increase in demand, then the airline prices are definitely going to go up. I would be willing to bet something on that, but not by how much.
Sounds good. So sticking with the air travel theme, but this also weaves into decoding some of those pesky acronyms. We have a couple folks asking about, can you simplify NDC, please? So give us your best succinct explanation of NDC, Joe.
Great. Okay. So the easiest way for me to put it is NDC is a standard. So it's not a thing. So it's really about new distribution capability in terms of how airlines distribute their products. What they want to be able to do is to have control over how they sell and distribute their product. What NDC allows them to do is to have complete control over that. At the moment, when an airline puts a fare into a GDS, it essentially doesn't belong to them anymore, because they get their fare sheet and they file it. So, whether they're filing it with the GDS provider, they're filing it with ARC, they file it. But once it's filed, it's no longer within their control. They can change it, they can amend, and they do. But the point is that's not an instantaneous process, and they are constricted by the number of fares that they're allowed to have by the way those current systems work. In an NDC system, and as I say, it's a standard, but what it allows the airlines to do is to reinvent that wheel. They are able to change everything in theory. So they can have as many fares as they want, and they're in complete control of those fares because they stay within their system. So they're able to then change them instantaneously. Nobody else is in control of them. They have complete control of their inventory, and they can have 200 fares if they want to. That wouldn't necessarily make logical sense, but where it does make logical sense in the corporate environment is it does allow the airlines to personalize and customize retail experiences if you're talking about leisure. But in the corporate environment, maybe you have an economy policy, but you want to be able to negotiate lounge passes, things like that. That can all be incorporated into your product in an airline environment in NDC that currently is too restrictive to do it in a GDS, which is the global distribution system. I've just realized I may be taking something and making it even more complicated by throwing in another name. So in the traditional system, they don't have that kind of flexibility. But NDC is not a thing. It's a standard. So IATA says, that's great. If you want to do all of that stuff, airlines, knock yourself out, but it needs to meet these standards. The problem is, and where it gets confusing, is that it's not a single standard. So each airline interprets that in their own way, and that's where a lot of the difficulty and the confusion comes in. Great.
And so sort of a follow-up clarification that came in, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm trying to use people's names where possible, but I also don't want to completely mess them up. So forgive me for not saying your name. But the follow-up question is NDC an alternative to the GDS? I guess, can you provide a little more clarification around that?
Yes, it is. So it's about where you get your content from. And so, you can get your content from a GDS system, or you can get your content from an NDC platform. If you think every time you go onto an airline website, if you go to BritishAirways.com or American Airlines, that is essentially NDC content. So it's really about getting that content into the traditional travel ecosystem and getting it all in one place so that you can still effectively manage a travel program. But, I have to say the traditional GDSs, the TMCs are doing a tremendous amount of work over this, because what we have seen in the last 12 months is the NDC activity from the airlines really pick up. So it's not going away. And actually, as an industry, I don't think we want it to go away, because, the progression of this journey actually could work out really well for managed travel programs in the long run.
Yeah, so this is really generating a lot of interesting conversation in the chat and the Q&A. So Natalie is adding, so whilst NDC remains sort of in progress, the biggest concern is around lack of visibility of NDC fares through the GDS, because again, when people go directly to brand.com, right, when they go directly to the airlines, it removes that duty of care element, right, because you don't have that necessarily have that visibility into the data. So she's asking, do you think the TMCs will eventually reach agreements with most airlines, or do you see the GDS as being phased out?
I don't see the GDS as being phased out. I do think the TMCs will reach agreements with those airlines. And I actually think the GDSs have a critical role to play in that. The GDSs are also doing a lot of work at the moment to be able to take that content into their environment. So it's really, and you must forgive me because I'm going to throwing some of the technical terms that might make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, but trust me, it's all about getting that feed in, and that can easily come in through an API feed. So, are the TMCs working on it? Yes, because obviously the point of using a travel management company and the point of having a globally managed travel program is exactly like Nat says. It's as Natalie says, it's about making sure that you have full visibility of your travelers, You know where everybody is for traveller tracking, duty of care, safety and security, also for reporting, for spend numbers, for negotiating, for sourcing. You really have to have visibility of that. But on the other hand, if you're working with a provider that is only giving you limited visibility of what's in the market, you know, that becomes a pointless exercise, because the noise that you get from your community within your own organization then becomes really quite valid. So, you know, back in the day where people would say, I found a much cheaper fare online, prior to NDC, you knew that simply wasn't possible because of the way the fares were distributed. So you knew they weren't looking at a like for like, there was always a reason, etc. With this new content only being distributed in a brand.com, I like that way of saying it, it is valid. There may well be content that they can see outside of that framework. So as a travel manager, it's really important and becomes even more critical that the people that you're working with, the TMCs, are providing you visibility of the full content and doing it in an environment that allows you to tick off all of those other checkboxes of a managed program.
Fantastic. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, call you out on one other acronym that you use to ask you to maybe provide so you talked about APIs. So can you talk about what API stands for, and maybe can you give us a simple example to sort of explain what it is?
So what it is, that's a very tech term. So no, I can't tell you what it stands for, but what I can tell you is what it does. So basically, it's the door between one system and another that allows the information to flow through completely. So it allows one system to talk to another. So it would allow an airline to talk to a GDS if they both open the portals, and that information can flow through. So the GDS can absorb the information from the airline. And that's basically what it does. And that works amongst all technologies. So whether it's in an online booking tool, whether it's, the data that goes to your duty of care, security provider, the way these systems talk to each other, the easiest way for them to talk to each other is through an API.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more, and Ben, thank you for stepping up. So API actually stands for Application Programming Interface. So
thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Gold star. So I'm going to ask one more airline-related question, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to shift to talking a little bit about sustainability, because we've got some questions coming in around that. But before I pose this next question, just letting everyone in the audience know, we did push another poll out about sort of COVID related hot topics. It looks like a lot of people have policy change questions, so feel free to send those in, and we'll reserve some time near the end of the session to tackle those COVID related policy change questions. All right, so airline questions, sort of transitioning us over to talking about sustainability for a few minutes. Let me just find the question again. Sorry about that. So many great things coming in. Okay, so this is related to reducing travel in premium classes. So Siobhan is asking, what should we be putting into our travel policies to achieve net zero carbon targets? For example, reducing travel in premium classes. Do you have any other examples, Joe?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, this. And, one of the other big discussions that's coming up alongside changing cabins is intermodality. So changing the method of travel completely. BCD did an interesting survey recently where they saw that the length of time that people hire a car for that they're prepared to drive to a meeting had more than doubled. So someone will get in a car and drive to a meeting for up to 5 hours, whereas previously that's a meeting they would have flown to. But all of these have different carbon outputs. So rail is another one that is becoming a bigger focus. If you can travel by rail instead of flying, I mean, I've been in this business longer than I care to remember. And I did a project recently as part of a TAMS initiative where we looked at the alternative to rail, the alternative to flying, and we looked at the carbon output. And I have to tell you, and I knew it was better, but I was shocked, Jen. I was shocked at the numbers, and I probably should have known enough to not be shocked, but I was. The rail journeys were like 90% lower in terms of the carbon output. Mm-hmm. And actually, when you calculated time between city centre to city centre on air versus rail, there was a large portion of Europe that you can get around easily by rail, certainly in the UK too. And we can see with the investment that's come from a lot of the governments to support the airlines through this crisis, mm-hmm. Some of those European carriers have very much had that in mind. So, the support that Lufthansa got, the support that Air France got, were dependent on them pulling back on regional travel and focusing on the long haul. And I can tell you in the UK, there's some really exciting stuff that's being done with some of the rail operators and their plans for what the future of rail can look like. The question is not necessarily around rail, but it's more around there's lots that you can do to look at getting your carbon footprint down. Reducing or pulling back the cabins that you're traveling in is definitely one. I mean, definitely. But then it comes back to the question of wellness. Right. So, if you have somebody that's traveling from New York to Tokyo, do you put them in an economy seat and then expect them to get off the other end and work? And what impact does that have on their body? So, I think it's balancing it. The most important thing is to have the numbers and the statistics to be able to make informed decisions on these things. So that has been a challenge around carbon offsetting. But really, I'm pleased to see that there's really fab technology that has started to come into the market that allows you to accurately measure the carbon footprint of a particular flight, not just an average, but a particular flight, so that you can then measure that against an alternative, whether it be car, whether it be rail, etc. Because there's a lot of people that are looking to, when they return to travel, to do it in a sustainable way. It's one of the things that comes up most oftentimes when people are looking about getting back to the road.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And I'm glad that you touched on rail, because actually there's been a pretty active conversation about rail going on in the chat. So thank you to everyone who's sort of jumping in and helping to answer each other's questions. Would love to see that dialogue among all of you. I'm not going to spend much more time on sustainability right now, because we have a couple sessions on the agenda today that are really going to dive into this topic. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. But Joe, since you mentioned wellness again, Simon, and thank you for doing this, Simon. He did go back in and add some more context around the topic and the question that he has. And I think, again, this also touches on policy changes that are coming out of the COVID crisis. So Simon is saying wellness, it touches travel and human resources. So he's asking, where would you start with making changes to policy? So covering the stress of travel, balance of, travel, work life, home life, promotion of diet, well-being, etc. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. So I think, really the place to start is to think, what is the purpose of a travel policy? So the travel policy is there to support the needs of the business, to get the employees from point A to point B in a safe and, in a safe way that is ticking all of the boxes of your duty of care. So if somebody needs to, and I'm just thinking of an example, if somebody needs to travel, say, from Manchester to London, does that meeting need to take place at 9 a.m. in the morning? Could that meeting perhaps take place later on? Could it take place at 11:30? That would allow somebody to get up at a better time. Maybe if you have children, get the kids to school, then you get on the train, you go down to London, you can work on the way down. It also takes you into the off-peak times. So the fare is cheaper, which also helps with the cost control. That's a tick for savings. But, is there a way, instead of doing that run that we've previously done where you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, sorry, Jen.
Hi, everyone. So sorry for those technical difficulties. And unfortunately, we are at the end of our time because we need to take a break before we officially kick off the event with our opening session. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for sending in your questions, your chats. Thanks for helping each other out with answers. And thanks to Jo for sharing her insights. We are recording all of these sessions, and the replay will be available in the SwapCard platform quite quickly. The team just needs to do some minor editing, so you should be able to go back and catch everything that we were able to capture. We've got a great lineup for the rest of the day. Thanks again. Enjoy the networking break. Please take advantage of the time to engage in some video or text chat with each other. You can reach out to Jo if you've got additional questions. And we'll kick off the official program at the top of the hour with our State of the Industry session. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone.